Welcome to the All Things Financial Podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest transitions you may ever face. We're talking about retirement. Retirement is one of those things that creeps up on you, and sometimes if you're not prepared, it can have some costly consequences.
Welcome to All Things Financial, where today we're talking about transitioning into retirement. And on this podcast, as you know, we help you retire once so you can retire well. We talk a lot about finances, talk a little bit about leadership, and today we're talking about one of the biggest changes that you can make in your life, which is how do you go from working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, collecting a paycheck, to now all of a sudden work stopping, paycheck stopping, contributions to retirement stopping, and now you're taking money out of retirement accounts that you've trained yourself your whole life never to touch. Exciting topic. What do you think, Yelisey?
Super exciting topic. And, one thing that always strikes me is when we talk to people and we ask them to try to get a sense, like, how long do you think retirement's going to last?
Right.
Nobody says 20, 30 years. They all say 10 to 15, and it's like, on average, it's going to be closer to the 20, 30 mark.
For sure.
And for us, the way we look at it is like, hey, you have a 20 to 30 year runway that you're probably not going to be working. And if you are, it might be for the first 5 or 10 years, maybe in a part-time capacity or a consulting capacity. But most of that's going to be relying on what you've done up until this point.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think one of the things that we see is for those that are thinking about retiring in the next 1, 3, 5, or 7 years, a couple things that we know. When you're young, the goal is save as much as you can, and hopefully it grows as much as it can so that pile of money is as big as it can get, whether you're hitting the 1 million, the 2 million, the 3 million, the 5 million, or the 10, whatever your number is. And I think one of the things that we help people do really well is figure out what does it look like to take money from that pile. You've never taken money out before. How do you do it in a way? I get a lot of people that say this will sound silly. I've saved a couple $1 million, but I don't even know how I get this money. What does that look like? And we explain, well, one of the things that we can do is we can set up a reoccurring paycheck from your investments. So now instead of getting paid from an employer, you're getting paid from your investments. And then every month what we do is we withhold federal taxes, we withhold state taxes, and then we can set that up as a reoccurring payment so it feels like a paycheck coming out right out of your account. And so what's interesting is I think when we talk about money, when we talk about taxes, when we talk about Social Security and pensions, really the name of the game is peace of mind. And how do you do this in a way that you get it right the first time? And I think one of the things that we love is providing clarity to people, helping people make sure that they get it right the first time. And I do think it's sad, and we see it, where people save so well, they work so well, and they'll make a mistake that can cost them, 5 or 6 figures just because they've never been in this mode before. And so point number 1 today that we're going to talk about is clarifying your financial picture. What does it look like to clarify that picture? And I think the first thing I would say before I hand it off is you should start planning for retirement in your 20s. You should start creating a picture of what a retirement plan looks like 5 to 7 years out from retirement. And a lot of the people that we meet with, they'll say, oh, I don't know that I'm ready for this conversation because I'm 3 years out. I'm 5 years out. I'm 7 years out. And I'm like, no, now's the time to have this conversation. Yeah. What are your thoughts on clarifying your picture?
I think that has to be step one. And, we have a lot of software that we pay for, but it's never been easier to do that. I mean, like you can go into ChatGPT, you can go into any AI program, you can put some projections in, you can mess with them and make changes and update those things. Like it's never been easier, yet most people have no clarity when it comes to their financial picture.
Yeah.
On a basic level, like for someone who's a retiree, we want to know all of their fixed or guaranteed sources of income first. Then we identify their expenses, or, you could do the expenses first. But really what I'm trying to get at is what's the income gap? How much do we need to pull from other sources? And then the conversation obviously goes a little deeper. Well, what other sources do you have to pull from? And what's the best order to pull from those sources? Because there is a correct order. Like you said, sometimes when we're talking about that $100,000 mistake, sometimes it comes from pulling from the wrong account. Sometimes it's the wrong investment. More often than not, it's probably not being disciplined and not making good decisions over time.
Right.
But, having that clarity, I feel like even though it's easier than ever, most people still don't have clarity around that picture. A lot of people are afraid of what the numbers look like. They're afraid that maybe they won't have enough for retirement and they'd rather not face that reality.
Right. I think too, one of the things that a lot of the families that we meet with are not thinking about is what their true expenses are. I think one of the things that we find often is people will say their expenses are $8,000 a month and they're bringing in $15,000 a month. And maybe there's $1,000 a month that goes into savings or $2,000, but it ends up getting spent between vacations, property taxes, and just life. And so I think one of the areas that we see a lot of mistakes is that people miscalculate how much income they need in retirement. And so I think that first step with clarifying your financial picture is how much income do you need? And typically the goal is that you would pay off any bad debt going into retirement so that you can live on 75 or 80% of what you've been living on. But what we find is most people, not only do they not cut their expenses those first 3, 5, 7 years of retirement, they actually end up increasing and needing more money because now you've got 6 Saturdays and a Sunday. And so, not retirement related, but I think one of the things that I'm reminded of, and I've talked on this, but is if you're in your 30s or maybe you're in your early 40s and you're saving for retirement and you want to increase it, but money already feels tight. One of the things that you need to find out is if you have an expense problem or an income problem.
Yeah.
Looking to see, because one of the things I've found is there's also, while there are a lot of people that could cut back and lower expenses, there's a lot of people that just have an income problem. And so if you're listening and maybe you're not preparing for retirement, but you're like, man, I love this show and I want to know what I should be doing. I'm thinking 20, 30 years out. One of the things you should be looking at is, do you have enough income? And if you don't, how do you increase your income between you and your spouse, whether that's adding on something that's second? And one of the things I would say before we move on is when it comes to creating income, I think one of the mistakes a lot of people in their 30s and 40s make is they think the more income sources you have, the better. And I would say, well, that's true. It's true at a certain point. And the point is that you need to have one thing that you're making a couple $100,000 in a year or more before you start a second or third, almost all the time. And I would just call that having an order. So be winning in one thing before you add a second thing.
Yeah. And I think, where you and I differ, I feel like our confidence in like the quality or the integrity of somebody's financial plan, like for me, like it takes a lot more for me to be confident. Yes, the software says you're not going to run out of money, but like, have you planned for some of these events that could happen? That could be catastrophic.
Yeah, long-term care.
Whether it's long-term care or something else. Like anything could happen. We could all have emergencies that take place in life. And I think that, if you're just relying on the software and you're just plugging in, a base inflation rate or maybe just the rate of return, and you're not really looking at any of those contingencies, I think sometimes we've seen plans that have failed. And, one thing that kind of speaks to this a little bit is, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they track inflation. But they also have a research figure. They still post the numbers, but it's for anyone over the age of 62, and it's called CPIE.
Elderly.
And the E stands for elderly people. Because really, in retirement, we just, retirees have different spending habits than the rest of the population.
Yeah.
And if you happen to be spending a lot more on things like healthcare, and by the way, like, it's really tough to gauge because no one person's healthcare situation is going to be really similar to somebody else's. We have some people that are just, very healthy in retirement, and then other people who start retirement with with medical needs that exceed what they're able to pay for through whatever insurance they have.
So number one, key point, clarify your financial picture.
Yes.
Know how much income you need, know where it comes from. Number two, build a smart income strategy. So I think one of the things a lot of people need to shift their mind on is that a successful retirement is not just a big nest egg. It's related to where is your paycheck going to come from. And so what I would tell people is shift away from I need 1 million or I need 3 million or I need 5 million or I need 10 million or whatever that number is, and shift from being a number person to an income person. And the reason I say that is for us, the people that are happiest in retirement are not just those with the biggest 401ks, 403bs, TSPs, IRAs. It's really those that have the most guaranteed income. So whether that's coming from a pension, whether that's coming from Social Security, whether that's coming from real estate, whether they've retired and they're a consultant and now 20 hours brings in almost as much or more than they did 40 hours. The name of the game really is driving income. And so one of the things I would encourage those who are listening to think about is what percentage of your expenses are covered by guaranteed income.
Yeah.
Whether that's Social Security, pensions, annuity, real estate, whatever those sources are. And if you can get to a spot where 70% or more of your expenses are covered by fixed things, then the market risk is pretty minimal as far as how it impacts you. And maybe in the years where the market's crushing it, you take that big vacation to Europe In the years where there's a market dip, you go to Wisconsin Dells if you're from Minnesota.
Yeah, and there's a stat from, I don't know if it was from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but basically it was talking about what percentage of Americans rely on Social Security for more than half of their expenses.
Yeah.
And it was like a huge percent. I feel like it was like something like 40% of people rely on Social Security very heavily.
Yeah, but that's using averages.
Yeah,
So, and I would say most of the people that are listening to a podcast like this are above average because they took the time to listen, they took the time to come to a class. And so most of them they've saved better than others, they've got less debt than others. And so what we would say though is most of them, half their income isn't going to be Social Security.
Right.
But if it is Social Security, pensions, real estate, then they're winning.
Yeah, and there's a difference between somebody who just happens to have half their income coming from Social Security versus somebody who relies on Social Security for half of their expenses.
Yeah.
So anyways, when it comes to some of these things, we talked about retirement being a little bit longer than what most people anticipate. Here's an interesting number. So the number of 90-year-olds has tripled since the 1980s. And it's expected to once again triple by 2040. So we have a lot of people that are turning 90 years old. A lot of people who never expected to be 90. And one thing too, ever since we got in the industry, everyone talked about how there's 10,000 Americans turning 65 every single day, something like that.
Now it's quite a bit more than that.
Now it's 11,000. We've seen numerous articles that have been titled something along the lines of the silver tsunami, right? Mm-hmm. We have a captive audience. There's a lot of people who need this information who are retiring and maybe don't have, like we mentioned in the first example, clarity on their financial plan or simply just haven't talked to somebody about these things. And I think really that's the first step because if you're already in your 60s, you can try to make up the time that maybe has been lost, but really you just need to have a plan in place. And a lot of small, good decisions can really lead to different outcomes. And that would be my encouragement.
Yeah. And I think one of the questions we get a lot under, or related to building a smart income strategy is where do I pull money from? How do I decide? Maybe I've got 3 rental properties. How do I decide if it's worth keeping them or if I should let them go? And so in the real estate world, for those that are listening, typically what they're talking about is a cap rate. And typically what you want is you want to be in that 9 to 10% or greater range. If your money in real estate isn't generating more than 9 or 10%, it'd be easier to keep it in the stock market. It'd be easier to have it invested because obviously you don't have the home repairs, you don't have management, you don't have
less
tenants.
Similar returns.
But if you're under that 9%, that's typically a good time to shift. The other thing that we see a lot is we see people they love real estate, but what they decide is when they hit their early or mid 70s, they have a plan to sell off the real estate to simplify. I think there's seasons in life where being busy and doing more and all of that feels productive. And actually it does pay off. There are also seasons of simplifying. Yeah. And so when I think about an income strategy, it's not just set it and forget it. One of the reasons why our clients come in 2-3 times a year is because their expenses change, the market changes. They might have had a property that paid them $2,500 a month and now they're selling that. Or maybe it used to be profitable and now it's not. And so one of the things I think about with a smart income strategy is that we create a plan, but then that plan continues to develop over time as things change. And so one of the things I'd encourage people as you prepare for retirement and transitioning is knowing where does income come from at the beginning of retirement? Where does it come from in 3, 4, 5 years? And do we have a plan for that? And that's one of the things that we can help a lot of people with.
Yeah, and I think that, there's different personalities in this. I was just talking to somebody who they're a very large landlord. And basically for the last 10 years, this guy's talked about retiring, told everybody he's finally getting out of it. It's just too much. And he's been averaging 3 to 5 new properties every single year, including last year.
Yeah, just add-ons.
It just continues to add on. And there really isn't an exit plan. And he just knows that he needs to stop doing this. He can't maintain it. Even there's certain things that, he said 20 years ago, I wouldn't have missed this. Yep. But he's still adding 3 to 5 properties a year. And it's just, not everybody has this problem, but disengaging and having an exit strategy, that's a big part of it, right? Your income does need to shift. There's certain things that you can't continue doing indefinitely.
Right.
Which I think brings us to the third topic and transitioning well. Transitioning well means a lot of different things for people. Obviously, we've talked about having a plan in place.
Yeah.
But what are some of the key things that you think people need to do in order to transition into retirement without maybe losing their health or some of the things that we often hear about with people who really don't have any direction or purpose in life?
Yeah, you might have the stats on this. I don't. But one of the things I've seen in, now over a decade of retirement planning is the people that retire and they're ready for it and they go, oh, I should have done this months ago, maybe years ago.
Yeah.
And then those that retire and they're bored. And so one of the things I would say to those that have a health or a lifestyle change coming up is to plan for what retirement looks like, meaning that maybe instead of going from working 50 hours a week to 0, you transition and you go part-time. The other thing that you shared with me the other day, we've talked about it, was that Fidelity had a study that said that most Americans, if they just worked 2 additional years, it's the difference of running out of money or having total financial peace. Yeah. And so one of the things that we get asked all the time is, hey, Trey, Yelisey, I'm thinking about retiring at 65. What does it look like if I go early at 63? I've got a new manager. Or one of the things we hear a lot is my company just shifted to a new software program and to only work for 18 more months. I don't want to spend the next 18 months on a new program. I'd rather just be done. And I think what we see is a lot of people, they might retire 2 years early instead of staying till 65 or 67, when the difference is really having more than enough money their whole retirement instead of strangling behind and barely making it. And so one of the things I would say is, for a lifestyle, have a good idea of, like we said, number one, what your financial picture looks like, know how much income that you need, but then also, instead of just shutting off that income, think about transitioning and reducing it over time. Because the other thing that we found is, for those that retire and they already knew how they were going to spend their time, they love retirement. But those that retire and they plan on spending the first year cleaning out their house and then finding hobbies, we find a lot of those people end up, I would say, almost going into a season of like near depression, because the purpose is gone and there was no plan for after the purpose other than to find it. And so what I would say is, don't retire until you know what you're going to do next.
Yeah. And I would say too, like, it shouldn't be that much of a transition, because I think a lot of people who retire successfully, like, they're already doing a lot of the things that they're going to simply maybe do more of.
Right.
They're already going to the events for their grandkids. They're already volunteering. They've been doing that. It's not like this stark change that's like, hey, we're overnight, it's like, we're just, we're going to cut the cord and this is what we're doing now. And I think that people really do that. People who've been doing some of those things really successfully, I feel like they do that better.
The other big piece is underestimating healthcare costs.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how often people will say, hey, if I retire pre-65 and I don't have Medicare yet, what do you think the cost is? And I'll say, well, you could do a bare bones plan that might be $300 to $500 a month, but typically it's going to be in the $500 to $700 a month range per person.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if you want a Cadillac plan, you're looking at $800 to $1,200 a month per person. And people are shocked by that. They're also shocked by the fact that they didn't incorporate that in their retirement plan. And now they go see, instead of working part-time to pay for health insurance, they pay that out of their investments. And it really devastates the portfolio for a lot of the people that we know. Align your budget with your real retirement goals, not just basic living expenses. So we talk about, and a lot of people have heard these comments before, but you have the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. So if you think about it, most people go from a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to 6 Saturdays and a Sunday. Well, when do most people spend the most amount of money?
Yeah.
On Saturdays. Now you've got 6 of them. So one of the things that we see people do is they build their retirement off of their fixed expenses, not their real expenses. And then they don't add in that for 5, 7, 10, if they're really healthy, maybe up to 15 years, they're going to travel. They're going to spend more because they have the 6 Saturdays. Yeah. And if you haven't entered that into seeing how long your money lasts, there's a good chance that the picture that your advisor and you have painted is not accurate.
Yeah. One thing that I really struggle with whenever we're sitting down with somebody, we're trying to paint the picture for them. And I get the sentiment, but somebody who's worked for a very, very long time, who's really looking forward to retirement, and whatever they plan for retirement, they just don't have enough. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to convey that to them, but they're unwilling to make any compromises. Mm-hmm. Like, no, like, I've worked for this. These are my golden years. I deserve this. And it's true. You have worked for 30, 40, 50 years. And there's a part of that where it's like, you should be able to have everything you want to have. But if it's not in the picture, like, I don't know, is there a better way to look at compromise than just calling it compromise? Like, we have to readjust. We have to make some changes. This isn't, you just don't have what it takes to go to Bora Bora twice a year.
Yeah, I think a lot of the families that we meet with, what they'll say is, the reason we waited so long is we were nervous about how these meetings would go. And a lot of them, they knew that they undersaved. But it is better to design your retirement around 3-star hotels than 5-star hotels, and you're sleeping knowing that the money's going to last forever instead of being at a 5-star hotel hoping you're going to make it. And I think one of the things I've watched is in every area of life, not just finances, is that if you can choose your heart, as the saying goes, meaning that the hard part of planning versus not planning, one of the things that I think all of us have is a need and desire to know that we're going to be okay. Especially in a marriage, statistically, women want stability more than anything, where I think men want excitement. Men want, the vision or the dream or the thing that they think they deserve, where women are like, I just want to be secure. And so one of the things I would say when it comes to planning for retirement is you need to have a real number of your lifestyle. And then we need to look to see, does the money or the savings and the pension and the Social Security support the lifestyle that you want?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, it's better to not live high on the hog, as all of our clients in their 60s and 70s say, but to still live a good life than to live high and then run out of money in your late 70s, early 80s. And I think I'm surprised too in that, I was telling some friends the other day is that a lot of times the cost of your lifestyle is dependent on the people you spend time with. I mean, we joke about it all the time, but I said to some friends the other day that are very successful, I said, man, nothing is more expensive than having rich friends. And I think that what you have to do is you have to say, are these things that fit into our budget? Are these things that we can afford to do? Or do we need to make some adjustments so that we're not spending our life being stressed, we're spending it in peace? And I think the biggest thing around money, which we both agree, is there's all these components that we talk about. Returns. We talk about the stock market performance. We talk about inflation. We talk about taxes. But at the end of the day, all of these pieces, we just want them to line up to what? Financial peace. And so what I would say is when you calculate your lifestyle cost, make sure that you're not being conservative from the standpoint of you're underestimating. Be conservative and overestimating so that your first 3 years of retirement, you have more money left than you think, not significantly less.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Couple of things. One, the transition to retirement, not easy, but it's not a single decision either. It's several decisions that your advisor, or if you don't have one, or if you have one, but they don't specialize in creating like a blueprint for retirement, is creating the several steps to making sure that the whole plan comes together so that you've got a successful retirement. Yeah. Number 2 is clarifying your finances, creating a smart income strategy, and planning for lifestyle. I'm going to hand it off to you, but one of the things I would say about a smart income strategy is that your investments change. You go from being growth focused probably to dividend focused if you need income. And so how does your strategy change in retirement for income? What are some of the other things that we said?
This one client represents the thinking that many of our clients have, where it's like they want it to be one single decision. Like they want it to be one thing like, hey, fix the returns.
Right.
Because if my advisor can only, if we can have higher returns, then we fix the problem.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's not going to be that. Like for me, I would say, well, fix your expenses.
Right.
Right. So it could be a combination of those things. Maybe we do have to lower expenses. Maybe, we talk about this sometimes when people have life cycle funds in their account where they have,
very common.
They have target accounts, right? 2030 accounts, 2040. That's their target retirement date in those accounts. Sometimes that's the worst thing for the client because think about it. The closer you get to the date, the more the portfolio shifts towards bonds
Safety,
and away from stock.
And lower returns.
Well, what happens if we have a correction?
Right.
By the time that we're in the recovery, you've already shifted more towards bonds and you're never going to be able to recover as quickly as the rest of us.
Right.
So sometimes, whenever we're looking at anyone's specific situation, like the tendency is, hey, we're getting closer to retirement. Why don't we make the portfolio very conservative? Well, that might not be what works for you because you might need the portfolio to be a moderate portfolio to keep up with your goals. But the other thing is you don't want to be too aggressive either because if you do end up experiencing a downturn in the economy, in the market, and you're actually relying on that portfolio, then you could be in a very tough position if you're having to realize losses. Mm-hmm. So there's no one glove fits all because some people rely more heavily on their portfolios. Some people, their fixed or guaranteed sources actually do make up 70% of their need, and they have a lot more flexibility on how and where they pull from other sources. But kind of like you said, there's going to be a number of levers that you can pull, and no one situation situation is exactly the same as another situation. So I think that, keeping that in mind, having somebody who can assess everything and give you a perspective that maybe you don't have, like a financial advisor, because, we all have different opinions on our own money, and we need that outside opinion, that outside perspective to help us make good decisions.
We want to help you retire once so you can retire well. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. If you've never had a second opinion on your spend down plan, your income plan, and taxes, one of the things that Yelisey and I would be happy to do for you is give you a second opinion to see if there's any spaces, to see if there's anything that could be improved. Feel free to request that, give us a call, or on our website at atfpodcast.com or atfwealth.com. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Advisory services are offered through CG Advisory Services, LLC, a registered investment advisor, and through Guardian Wealth Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor. CG Advisory Services, LLC, and Guardian Wealth Strategies, LLC, are separate and unaffiliated entities. The topics discussed on this podcast are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be investment advice or recommendations. Listeners should consult with their own financial professionals before making any investment decisions.